Those Budweiser Clydesdales, stars of public events and Super Bowl commercials, pay a price for their fame. To prance like icons, the horses go through a cruel procedure, so painful it's illegal in some states and some countries. Budweiser's cruelty toward Clydesdales, exposed on the PETA Podcast. Welcome to the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil, Guillermo, your host for this inside look at animal rights, brought to you by PETA, the largest animal rights organization in the world. On today's episode, the Clydesdale horses of Budweiser are all about the feel-good. From Super Bowl ads to the regional and local public appearances, that's what they sell. Oh, and the beer. But there's no feel-good when young horses begin their careers at Budweiser, as the young horses endure a painful mutilation of their tails. In my conversation with PETA Senior VP Kathy Guillermo, she explains the process, what Budweiser says about it, and how a PETA investigator got Budweiser employees to admit to the mutilations. And it's all because someone at Budweiser feels the mutilation improves the horse's look. The Clydesdale cruelty explained on the PETA Podcast. So tell me, what's the deal with the Clydesdales? Why does PETA care about the Clydesdales of Budweiser?
You know, this is Super Bowl Sunday as we're recording this. And for many people, one of the iconic commercials of nearly every Super Bowl game is the Budweiser Clydesdales and the all-American values, the traditional feelings, how they make you want to hug your dog. But what we have done this year is reveal a very dark secret about the Clydesdales that Budweiser owns. And that is that the horses who are used to pull those beer wagons in countless parades and through the streets before the Super Bowl have their tailbones severed from their bodies.
Wow, tailbone severed from their body. That sounds pretty serious.
It's a mutilation. I don't think there's any other way to describe it. It was something that was done quite frequently back in the 17 and 1800s in England, where, by the way, it is now illegal. And it was done with draft horses, these great big horses, of which Clydesdales are one, mostly for the way that they look. They may tell you it has something to do with the tail hair not getting caught in the hitch of the wagon, but that's easily dealt with. It is so that they look a certain way. And if anybody wants to take a look, go back and look at the Clydesdales Budweiser commercials from years past, or Google them online and look at how very short their tails are. That's incredibly unnatural. And the way that they do this is they do it when they're very young, and they do it either with a tight band that kills the tail by cutting off the blood flow, or surgically with a scalpel by actually amputating the tailbone. We're not sure which way they do it, but the end is the same. The horse basically has no tail.
So, all right, it sounds bad, but we see these ads and the horses are out there doing their thing. They don't look like they're in any pain. What is really the problem when you mutilate these horses?
Well, first of all, it's entirely unnecessary. It's painful. Whichever of the two ways it's done, it hurts. And it causes the horse lifelong issues with balance, especially when they're running, turning, and stopping. And it prevents them from being able to move what should be a long tail and to swish flies and other insects, biting insects, off their bodies. And it's also, if you think about it, a way that horses communicate. So we're depriving them of their first line of defense against insects. We're causing them pain. And when I say we, I mean Budweiser, not all of us. But when it's done, also, it prevents the horses from communicating what their state of mind is to others.
And so why now did you get some information that these procedures were done? Or how do you know that this is happening? Because I know that Budweiser denies anything bad is happening. And some people say, oh, well, I've seen the Clydesdales. They look perfectly normal. Are they normal?
No, and Budweiser's refused to respond. What we did was conduct an undercover investigation. Of course, we knew simply from observing the Clydesdales that their tails had been amputated or severed. The parlance of the industry is docked, but a tail docking doesn't convey really what it is, which is a severing of the bones that are part of the spine. Budweiser's silent on it. And when the New York Post last week broke our undercover investigation about it, all that Budweiser would say is that we give the horses great veterinary care, essentially. They refuse to address the issue of severing of the tails at all.
So in general, they kind of deny that anything bad is happening, but they don't zero in and speak specifically about the tail issue.
They don't deny that it's done. And of course, it's impossible for them to deny it because when you see what the horses look like, you can tell. And it's not normal to have a very short tail all tied up in a bow, which is what the Clydesdales who pull those wagons have. If you visit Warm Springs Ranch, where the horses are born, or Grant's Farm, where they're trained in Missouri, as our undercover investigators did, you'll see horses with their full natural tails, which are quite long, and the hair of the tails grow all the way to the ground. And then you'll see those foals, which are usually the colts, because it's the male horses who pull the wagons. The colts have their tails severed. So you can very easily see the difference when you see them side by side.
But some people, if they go and see the Clydesdales, they'll say, oh, they look perfectly normal. Well, they're looking at the females and their tails aren't docked.
That's correct. They're looking at the females. And I think, honestly, most people are unaware of this issue. This is not something that we see in everyday life. We don't use draft horses to pull wagons anymore in this country. But I can tell you that the severing of the tails, which is what Budweiser does, it's illegal in numerous countries, including England, Scotland, Ireland. And it's illegal here in 10 states. That's how serious it is.
So,
even the American Veterinary Medical Association, which is known for its very conservative stances on issues involving animals, opposes the severing of the horses' tails, as does the American Equine Veterinary Association.
All right. So now, why dock the tails? If it's painful, if it impairs the balance of horses, why does Budweiser insist on doing it?
It's cosmetic. It's entirely cosmetic. Now, under pressure, some of the employees of Warm Springs and Grant's Farm and some of the handlers of the horses in the parades, whom our investigators questioned, talked about how the hair gets caught in the hitch if they don't shorten the tail. That's, of course, absurd because all one has to do is braid the hair of the horse's tail and wrap it. There's a process called wrapping, and it's just a stretchy sort of bandage that goes around the horse's tail, and that would keep it from getting caught in any hitch. We did talk to two handlers on the road with the Clydesdales and the wagons who admitted that, yes, they do sever the bones. And the only reason for doing that, given the very good options to protect the horses from the hitch, is for cosmetics reasons. It's just how it looks. And for some reason, for 90 years, this is the 90th anniversary of the Clydesdales, they think the horses have to look that way. And that's what we are trying to persuade them they need to move away from.
Has there been any studies done of what happens to the horses after? I mean, I don't suppose they continue working as Clydesdales for the rest of their lives, but the ones who have their tails docked, do they end up living a less than perfect life because of the situation?
Without question, they're not able to do the sorts of normal things that horses do. Something so simple as walking through a field and flicking a fly off. And you have to understand horses' skin is so sensitive that they can feel the fly landing on them. They're not able to get rid of those pests. And some of the horses that we saw at Warm Springs would stamp their feet in sort of a frustration because the insects were landing on them. There wasn't anything that they could do about it. And of course, it impacts the balance for the rest of their lives. The veterinary expert we spoke to said that they have to accommodate for the loss of that part of their spine in the way that they move. So it's a lifelong impact. It causes them discomfort for their entire lives.
And so as those old ones retire, they live less than satisfactory lives because of this docking. So the new colts come up and they get their tails docked, and it's just one continuous cycle.
Right. And I refuse to call it docking. That's such an innocuous sounding word. It sounds, like you want to put the mail in the mailbox or something. It doesn't convey the seriousness of it, because let's think about what's going on. Budweiser is cutting off the tailbones of horses so that they'll look a certain way so that they can market beer. That, in the starkest terms, is what's going on, and it needs to stop.
Why does Budweiser, they just like the fact that this is the way the horses always look? If you presented them with these findings, I mean, clearly they know what they're doing. But now that, I guess, with this undercover investigation, now that it's been exposed, do you think there'll be pressure on them to just say, yeah, we do it, and maybe it's not so great an idea, we should stop it? Or I guess that would be the best thing.
We're putting pressure on them right now. And I will tell you also that I wrote to Budweiser 2 weeks before we released our investigative footage. And people can see that video of the Budweiser, as well as our unofficial Budweiser Clydesdale commercial, if they go to PETA.org. But I wrote to the CEO of Budweiser, of Anheuser-Busch, which owns Budweiser, and asked him to please stop amputating the tails of the horses. No response. Followed up a week later, CC'd their media person, just in case that would encourage them to respond, and no answer. So consequently, they will be facing protests wherever those Clydesdales go. Already in Glendale, Arizona, where the Super Bowl is, there were 2 visitations by the Clydesdales that were scheduled. One was Friday and one was today, and both were canceled because they heard that PETA supporters would be out there with signs. Of course, we're not going to do anything to upset the horses, but we would have been there with signs and with leaflets letting people know what happens to these horses. And Budweiser canceled those scheduled appearances. So they're feeling pressure, and they're only going to feel more pressure. We'll be in St. Louis outside the Anheuser-Busch manufacturing plant on Wednesday this week. And we will be there with a mobile billboard and some very creative costumes drawing attention to it. So if they think they're going to ignore us, then they're going to have a nice surprise.
Is there any reason, either logically or scientifically or artistically, does it make by taking their tails and mutilating them, does it make the horses perform better, for example? Or is there any reason, aside from cosmetics, that one might say, oh yeah, I'm justifying this disfigurement of the tail because this is a good thing? Anything they could say like that?
They, as I mentioned, they will try to say it has to do with the hair getting caught in the hitch. But as I've pointed out, that's easily dealt with. There is no justification. There is no excuse. They've done it for 90 years. They want to keep doing it so the horses will look a certain way. That's not acceptable. We live in a time when people no longer are willing to stand by while horses are abused for entertainment and for sport. This is leading to the downfall of horse racing. This is why the International Olympic Committee is under fire. This is why the modern pentathlon has eliminated horses from that part of the 5-sport pentathlon beginning in 2028. This is 90 years on for Clydesdales, but this is the beginning of a public that's saying no more.
Yeah, it sounds to me like, all right, as an Asian American, you think of things like the idea of foot binding, which is an old, ancient Chinese specific tradition, but people are horrified by that. This is the same kind of mutilation for horses.
There's so many terrible things that are done to horses in the name of sport and entertainment, and most of them are so easily eliminated. There's a reason it's illegal in many places. It's unnecessary and it's cruel. And it's the kind of cosmetic procedure, like so many others, that just has to go by the wayside now.
So if people were upset, what can they do? What kind of actions can they take? Should they stop buying Budweiser beer, or should they stop watching the Clydesdale ads? What should they do?
Well, if I had any Budweiser in my refrigerator, which I don't, I would empty out the beer down the sink and I would mail the cans back to the company and say, these are the last cans of Budweiser I will ever buy until you stop mutilating horses. They can certainly take action at PETA.org. We have an action alert set up so that emails will be sent directly to Anheuser-Busch and Budweiser. And watch for appearances of the Clydesdales and join us in our protests. We'll be letting people know around the country as we come out for where the horses are.
Yeah, you think about this issue and you know how they like to use the Clydesdales, Budweiser, in those commercials. And it is a kind of nostalgia, sentimental. It's about values, American values. And it seems to butt up against the cruelty that is done to the Clydesdales.
That's the crazy thing when we talk about how good those commercials make us feel and how we all get teary-eyed, the little golden retriever puppy coming up to the Clydesdale. Well, in fact, what's going on is something much darker and much worse. And so we don't need to be taken in by those commercials anymore. They're manipulative when you find out that behind the scenes, they're harming animals. There are a lot of American traditions that we have rejected. Child labor is one. Forced labor of any kind is another. And this is another tradition that we need to get rid of. And we need to stop thinking of the Clydesdales as warm and fuzzy representations of everything we love about America and look at them for what they are. They're animals who've been abused and they're animals who've been disfigured so that someone can sell beer. And that's the way we need to think about it.
A lot of people who've heard the story, they've read it in the news, they might hear this podcast and they might remember, oh, we've seen them in Missouri. They're not bad. Oh, PETA must be lying here. They're not telling the truth. But you have evidence. You have the undercover investigation.
That's right. And I grew up in Missouri and they used to come to my hometown for the St. Patrick's Day parade every year, the Clydesdales. And they're beautiful, beautiful animals. So I understand that people don't want to think that Budweiser would exploit them in this way and would harm them in this way. And I've seen a number of people say, oh, it's just a haircut. It's not as bad as you're saying. But it is as bad as we're saying. And we can tell from looking at them, number one, and the expert opinions that we've had, and also because we have the employees who admit to it on camera. So go take a look at that video and take a look at the side-by-side views of horses who have tails who've been severed with horses who haven't. And it's quite obvious. And what did the employees say when, you essentially got them to admit that, yeah, we mutilate the tails? Were they apologetic? How did they feel? They were a bit matter of fact about it. I don't think they're in on that decision-making process. And one of them said, well, it's done when they're young. Another one just said simply, yes, that they cut the tails off so that they'll look a certain way or so that their hair doesn't get cut in the hitch. But what can they say? These are people who are on the road with the horses and presumably they're enjoying their jobs working with these magnificent animals. Other employees were very misleading about it. They didn't exactly deny it, but they implied that it was simply a hair trim. So yes, the proof is there. The proof is there, and the proof is on the horses' rear ends too. Yeah, I think a lot of people though who, are used to seeing the Clydesdales on a regular basis on TV or maybe at live at events, they get, like I said, they get a little warm and fuzzy, and they can't. No, don't say it's not true, Budweiser. Say it's not, but it is true. They mutilate the horses. It's an easy fix for Budweiser. If they want to rehabilitate their reputation after this has been exposed, all they have to do is commit never to sever the tails of horses again going forward. That's it? That's all they have to do. PETA's not asking for anything more. We're asking them to stop disfiguring horses. That's pretty straightforward, and it should be easy for anybody to do. PETA Senior VP Kathy Guillermo on the ongoing Budweiser cruelty to its Clydesdales. You can help stop it. Go to PETA.org.
And that's our show for today. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to send a link of this to your friends. Tell them you like the PETA Podcast. Contact us at PETA.org. You can find me on Twitter at Emil Amok. That's EMILAMOK. Or see my vlog at amok.com. Or see my work at ALDEF, the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund. That's at ALDEF, AALDEF.org/blog. And if you're in New York City, February 16th through March the 4th, you can see me at the Fringe Festival, the Frigid Fringe. I do a show, Emil Amok, lost NPR host found under St. Mark's. February 16th through March 4th at the Frigid Fringe at frigid.nyc. Once again, thank you for listening. Check out all our episodes on your favorite podcast app or on Apple Podcasts, where you can rate and review the show. It helps get the word out about the issues you care about. Join us again next time for more insight into animal rights and the fight for a cruelty-free world on the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo.